Pastor Matt here, and we are reading through chapter 9 of the Mortification of Sin by John Owen. And chapter 9 is about symptoms of a particular lust, or as he calls it, a particularly disturbing lust. And he's talking about symptoms that are signs that, man, this is a serious situation. I understand this better now that I've read the first part. This is a serious situation. So the symptoms to look for. Number one, the sin is long-standing and deep-rooted. That was number one. Number two, when the heart secretly pleads to approve and not oppose it. So your own heart is secretly pleading with you to approve and not oppose it. Don't oppose it. Don't give this up. And we're going to hit number three in this part three. Actually, I think we're hitting number three and number four, the next two symptoms. So, number three, there is frequent success in sin seduction. So this is talking about it's working. So this lust it's having its effect. So you're giving in. Okay, that's the phrase we might use. That you're giving in to it a little bit more often than you'd like to admit publicly or to yourself. Okay, that's a serious situation. So if the sin seduces the soul frequently and it obtains the general consent of the will to do it, then we have another dangerous symptom. This is that, I mean, when the sin gets the consent of the will with some delight, even though it is not actually committed, it has succeeded. Oh, that's interesting. So the will is maybe giving in mentally, but even if it doesn't give in physically, right? There's some success on the part of the sin. Man may not be able to outwardly finish the sin, as James puts it, because of the circumstances. Yet, if the will to commit the sin was actually obtained, then I say it has succeeded. All right, let's just be really honest, really frank right now, and say here's a perfect illustration of this: is sexual lust, right? So and Jesus teaches this specifically. If you look at a woman and lust with your heart, you've committed adultery already, right? Remember, he teaches that in the gospel accounts. Well, think about this. This is basically what John Owen is saying right here. He's saying, so maybe the circumstances don't allow you to finish it, as James put it. The circumstances don't allow you to carry it out. But man, if you could have, you would have, right? That has been one of the key, most important developments in my life is when I started recognizing that I may not have done certain things in my life. I've never uh, committed sexual immorality since I've been married. I haven't physically interacted with anyone outside of marriage. But I'm telling you what, right now, that just because I didn't doesn't mean I wouldn't have. That's a terrible thing to admit, especially in a public podcast. But it's not like there are specific people, or it's not like there are specific people, but I'm just saying, just in general, the reality is I've come to accept and acknowledge the fact that, man, I can't pat myself on the back for good success in that, because I, I'm pretty sure I don't have anything specific or any specific time or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that if the opportunity would have come, I may have given in because it was in my heart and it was present in my heart. Does that make sense? Right? Same thing, I think, with addictions, right? If you're dealing with a drug addiction, you may not be able to carry it out because you don't have anything right there to carry it out, right? You don't have the stuff, right? But that doesn't mean it may not be having some effect or some impact or some success. That's what he's talking about. Now, if lust is able to get this far, it may be quite dangerous. The man is in a bad state, perhaps unregenerate, perhaps unregenerate. It depends on whether this consent is achieved by choice of will or by accident. In a way, an accident may still be chosen. If we are careless and negligent, whether we are required to be careful and watchful, then that accident does not reduce the voluntary nature of what we do. Although men do not choose to be careless and negligent, if they choose a course of action that will make them so, then they choose the accident itself. Highlighter, please. I don't know how much of this to highlight. Depends on whether this consent is achieved by choice. It depends on whether this consent is achieved by choice of will or by accident. In a way, an accident may still be chosen. Let's highlight that. If we are careless and negligent, where we are required to be careful and watchful, then that accident does not reduce the voluntary nature of what we do. Although men do not choose to be careless and negligent, if they choose a course of action that will make them so, then they choose the accident itself. Let us not think that the evil of men's hearts is less because they seem to be surprised into the consent they give to it. It is negligence in their duty to watch over their hearts that betrays them into that surprise. Number 4, that's sobering, honestly. Number 4, when a man fights against his sin only with legalistic arguments. Back to my pen here. If a man opposes his sin only with arguments as to its consequences or punishment, it is a sign that sin has taken substantial possession of his will. There is an overflow of wickedness in his heart. A man whose only objection to the seduction of sin and lust in his heart is the fear of shame among men or hell from God would commit the sin if no shame or punishment were involved. How that would differ from living in the practices of sin, I do not know. That summarizes my teen years. I was less concerned about. I mean, I was a pretty good kid, but it was all about legalistic purposes. Just didn't want to get in trouble. Those who are Christ act in obedience to gospel principles. To oppose the seduction of sin in their lives and lust in their hearts, they have the death of Christ, the love of God, the repulsive nature of sin, the preciousness of communion with God, and a deep-grounded abhorrence of sin as sin. Joseph did so. How shall I do this great evil, he says, and sin against the Lord, my good and gracious God? And Paul writes, the love of Christ constrains us. Having received these promises, let us cleanse ourselves from all pollution of the flesh and spirit. But if a man is so dominated by the power of his lust that he has nothing but the law to oppose it, then that sin possesses his will. If he cannot fight against it with gospel weapons and deals with it entirely by hell and judgment, which are the proper arms of the law, then it is evident that sin has conquered his will and his affections, and to a very great extent. Such a person has rejected the conduct of renewing grace. He is kept from ruin only by restraining grace. He has fallen from grace and is now back under the power of the law. This must surely provoke Christ to anger. He has thrown off Christ's easy, gentle yoke and rule, and put on the iron yoke of the law just to indulge a lust. Judge yourself by this. What do you say to your soul when sin forces you to make a stand? You must either serve the sin and rush into folly like a horse into battle, or you must make headway against it to suppress it. How does the conversation go with yourself? Do you say, the outcome of this will be hell? Vengeance will find me? If so, then it is time for you to look around. Evil lies at your door. To clearly demonstrate that sin shall not have control over believers, Paul's main argument is that they are not under the law but under grace. If your battles with sin are all legalistic, what assurance do you have that sin will not control you and be your ruin? You need to know that this preserve of the law will not hold out for long. That's true. If your lust has driven you from stronger gospel forts, then it will speedily overrun this one too. Do not assume that the law will deliver you when you have voluntarily surrendered to your enemy those helps and means of preservation that are 1,000 times stronger. Unless you recover from this condition quickly, be assured that the thing you fear most will come upon you. What gospel principles do not do, legal motives cannot do. What gospel principles do not do, legal motives cannot do. Well, there's a lot to chew on there. I may have to actually read through this again myself. And expound on this because there's so much in this little section, these symptoms, so much that I find convicting, but I also find to be encouraging because I'm recognizing that my early Christian walk was plagued by these poor sorts of ways and plagued by these symptoms. And by God's grace, there's a lot of these principles that I go, man, I remember learning that principle. I didn't have the right words for it, but it's a demonstration of God's grace and the power of the Spirit that He's been teaching me these things as I've gone along, and recognizing these things. I'm so thankful though for this book, because I think it's going to give me an opportunity to really solidify some of those principles in my mind and not go back to any of those former ways of dealing with it. I think this is a great one here. This fourth symptom of dealing with it through lust. In this paragraph right here, judge yourself by this. When you're fighting against sin, what's the thing that constrains you? If it's law, or say put the outcome of this will be hell, vengeance will find me. Um, he says evil's at your door. That's not going to be a constraining way. The gospel principles, what the gospel principles do not do, legal motives cannot do. So true. Well, thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope that Mortification of Sin by John Owen has been helpful to you. And if you have any questions, again, please feel free to call me. If you feel that some of these symptoms are speaking directly into your condition and you're in fear of the danger of sin, then please feel free to reach out to your pastor, or you can reach out to me as a pastor. I would be more than happy to, wherever you're at, um, talk with you over the phone or through a video conference to try to help you think through and work through these challenges. Again, thank you for listening.